the sun rose over Rome as a witness to the unyielding might of an empire that knew no mercy. During the reign of Emperor Diocletian, the eternal city was a labyrinth of marble and shadow, where the scent of burnt offerings to Jupiter and Mars filled the air. Diocletian was not merely a ruler, he was the self-proclaimed Lord of the world, a man who demanded that his subjects' souls belong to the state. In this atmosphere of absolute power, the smallest whisper of dissent was treated as treason, and a new mysterious faith was spreading like a quiet flame through the darkened alleys and even into the very heart of the imperial palace. Among those who stood closest to the throne were Nereus and Achilles. They were not common men, they were elite palace officials. Their uniforms were symbols of prestige, and their presence signaled the emperor's personal authority. Yet, within these men, a revolutionary transformation had taken place. They had heard stories of a king whose kingdom was not of this world and whose power was found in sacrifice. Nereus and Achilles began to see the hollow nature of the pagan rituals they were forced to protect. They saw the cruelty of the persecution against the innocent, and their hearts, once hardened by the rigors of military life, softened under the grace of the gospel. The internal struggle eventually reached a breaking point. They realized they could no longer serve two masters. To remain in the service of Diocletian meant to participate in the worship of idols made of cold stone. In a world where the military belt was a sign of a man's identity, Nereus and Achilles made a choice that was both a spiritual triumph and a social death sentence. Before their fellow soldiers, they unbuckled their belts, discarded their weapons, and stripped away the ornate uniforms that defined their earthly careers. They were no longer soldiers of Rome. They were soldiers of Christ. This act was a public declaration that their true allegiance lay elsewhere. While these veterans were choosing their path, another figure was entering the gates of the great city. Pancratius, a boy of only 14 years, arrived in Rome as an orphan. He carried no riches or letters of recommendation, but he possessed a legacy far more precious than Roman gold. His parents had been faithful Christians, and before their deaths, they had instilled in him a courage that defied his tender age. To the world, he was a vulnerable child. To the heavens, he was a giant. He walked the streets of Rome with the same unwavering spirit that had led Nereus and Achilles to renounce their positions. The tension in the city reached a fever pitch when Diocletian issued a fresh imperial decree. He demanded a public display of loyalty from all citizens. They were to offer sacrifices and incense to the Roman gods. This was a trap designed to smoke out the secret believers and force them into submission or death. The decree was posted in every public square, a shadow hanging over every Christian household, testing the resolve of every soul who dared to follow the path of the cross. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The moment of testing arrived for Nereus and Achilles. Because of their former status, their actions were scrutinized more closely than most. They were summoned by the Roman officials to lead a public sacrifice, a ritual meant to prove they had abandoned their new faith. As the crowd gathered and the priests prepared the altars, a heavy silence fell over the square. Nereus and Achilles stood at the center. Instead of reaching for the incense, they stood resolute, their faces reflecting a peace that confused their persecutors. Their silence was a firm decision. The public trial had begun, and as they were led away, the certain doom that awaited them began to unfold. The iron gates of the Roman prefecture clanged shut behind Nereus and Achilles, echoing like a final verdict through the halls of justice. They were no longer the prestigious officials who commanded respect. They were now prisoners of an ideology they once helped enforce. The Roman officials looked at them with a mixture of pity and confusion. They were brought into a chamber where the air was thick with the scent of old parchment and the oppressive weight of imperial law. Nereus His voice steady and devoid of fear, looked the official in the eye and explained that they had spent years serving an emperor who sought to become a god, only to find the true God who had become a man. He told the court that while Diocletian could claim their service on earth, their souls belonged to a king whose throne was established in the heavens. Achilles added that their military oaths were meant for the protection of the innocent, not the persecution of the faithful, and thus their true emperor was not the man in the palace, but the Lord of life. Seeing that threats were not working, the officials changed their tactics to something more seductive. They brought out chests filled with gleaming gold coins and jeweled daggers. They spoke of the luxury they were discarding, the fine silk robes, the lavish banquets, and the influence that came with the emperor's personal favor. Yet, for Nereus and Achilles, the gold seemed like dull lead compared to the radiance of all the truth they carried. They replied that the riches of Rome were fleeting, destined to crumble into dust, while the kingdom they sought was eternal and incorruptible. Their refusal was not born of pride, but of a profound realization that nothing the world offered could satisfy the hunger for the divine truth they had finally tasted. While the veteran soldiers stood their ground, the focus of the imperial court shifted to the young Pancratius. The boy was brought before Diocletian himself, who sat upon a golden throne, his eyes as cold as the marble statues he worshipped. The emperor, perhaps moved by the boy's youth, or perhaps seeking a symbolic victory, initially spoke with a voice like honey. He offered to treat Pancratius as his own son, promising him a life of privilege and wealth if he would only offer a single pinch of incense to the gods of Rome. He reminded the boy that he was an orphan, and that the state could provide the family he had lost. When Pancratius remained silent, the emperor's tone shifted. The honey turned to acid. He described the horrors of the arena, the teeth of the lions, and the edge of the sword. He threatened to erase the boy's name from history. Pancratius did not flinch. With a clarity that stunned the assembly, he told the emperor that the gods he worshipped were nothing more than dead stones and cold metal, unable to hear a prayer or offer a single breath of life. He laughed at the idea that a piece of marble could be a god. This defiance fueled a rage that could only be satisfied by blood. Pancratius was cast into the deepest, darkest dungeon of the city, where the smell of salt and decay filled the air. In the damp gloom, he found Nereus and Achilles. The meeting was a divine orchestration. The veterans saw in the boy the future of the faith, and the boy saw in the veterans the strength of a lived conviction. They prayed together, their voices rising like incense from the shadows, forming a bond of spiritual family that transcended blood. They reminded each other that the darkness of the cell was only a prelude to the light of paradise. As the first gray streaks of dawn touched the Roman sky, the armored guards returned. A final offer of mercy was made and rejected. They were led toward the Aurelian Way, the road to their ultimate sacrifice. The walk along the Aurelian Way was marked by a strange, heavy stillness. The bright Roman sun, climbing into a clear sky, cast long shadows of the three condemned men against the ancient paving stones. Nereus and Achilles walked with the measured, rhythmic step of veterans returning home after a long campaign. Their chains clanked with every movement, creating a metallic rhythm that served as a somber funeral dirge for their earthly lives. Yet to their ears, it was a celebratory anthem for their heavenly birth. Beside them, the young Pancratius moved with a lightness that defied his situation. While the crowds gathered along the roadside hurled insults, the three martyrs remained strangely untouched. Their eyes were fixed on the distant horizon, looking far beyond the massive city walls toward a celestial kingdom that no earthly sword could ever diminish. When they reached the designated site, the air grew unexpectedly cold. Nereus and Achilles were the first to face the executioner's blade. They did not beg for mercy, nor did they curse the men who held the steel. Instead, they shared a final, profound look of fraternal love, a silent confirmation of the oath they had taken to a power higher than Rome. With a quiet dignity that stunned the guards, they knelt. The heavy steel fell with a sickening thud, and in that instant their service to the earthly empire ended, and their eternal reign began. Then came the moment for Pancratius. The executioner hesitated for a fleeting moment as he looked upon the boy's serene face. There was no trace of terror in his eyes, only a radiant joy. Pancratius stretched out his neck, offering it to the sword as one might offer a gift. He smiled, a final expression of victory that seemed to mock the concept of death. With one stroke, the boy joined his brothers. A sudden and profound silence descended upon the Aurelian Way. The angry shouts of the mob died down, replaced by a realization that something extraordinary had occurred. The executioners wiped their blades, but they could not wipe away the image of the boy's smile or the soldier's unshakable peace. It was a silence that carried the weight of conviction. Many who had come to watch a spectacle left with a seed of doubt planted in their hearts, a seed that would eventually bloom into faith. The bodies were lovingly recovered by the small community of secret believers and buried with honor. Their resting places became holy sanctuaries where the weary would find strength. The blood of Nereus, Achilles, and Pancratius became the foundation upon which the church would flourish. Their names were whispered in the catacombs and eventually shouted from pulpits, becoming a spiritual shield for the faithful. They were the eternal and unwavering patrons of sacred courage. Through the centuries, the prayer to these three saints has remained a powerful and guiding beacon. We call upon them to grant us the same fortitude they displayed before the emperor. We ask for their protection against the spiritual enemies that seek to diminish our resolve. Their intercession is a reminder that no matter how powerful the emperors of our modern world may seem, there is a peace that surpasses understanding available to those who remain loyal to the truth. As we reflect on their sacrifice, we look at our own daily lives. We may not face the sword, but we face daily trials that demand the same unwavering spirit. This unforgettable story of Nereus, Achilles, and Pancratius is not a tragedy, but a glorious triumph. It is a call to perseverance, a reminder that the narrow and difficult path of the cross leads to a crown of glory. In the face of darkness, they chose the light. In the face of death, they chose life. May their courage inspire us to stand firm in our own values and confidently walk toward our own horizons with the same smile of victory that once lit up the Roman morning so many centuries ago.